In a small, fog-laden town, nestled between dark forests and abandoned fields, there existed an unsettling presence that lingered like a bad dream. The townspeople often whispered stories of a woman named Elvira, a once kind and gentle soul consumed by an insatiable curse. What had happened to her was a mystery wrapped in dread, a grotesque tale that parents would tell their children to keep them from wandering too far at night. Each tale began with a blood-curdling hook, the night Elvira discovered the second mouth on the back of her head. It all began on a cold autumn evening when Elvira returned from her daily chores. The leaves, painted in shades of orange and gold, whispered around her as she walked, creating a symphony of crunching sounds beneath her feet. Elvira was well known in the town for her kindness. She often baked pies filled with juicy apples or sweet berries, always eager to share them with anyone in need. However, on this particular night, the air felt thick with an unexplainable tension, almost like the anxious moment before a storm. As she entered her humble home, the door creaked slightly, adding to her unease. Inside, the air was chilly and still. Elvira placed her basket of groceries on the old wooden table, its surface worn from years of use. The dim light from the flickering lantern cast eerie shadows across the room. Just as she turned to light the lantern, a sharp pain pierced the back of her neck. Confused and terrified, she stumbled forward, clutching her head tightly. And that's when she looked in the dusty mirror hanging on the wall. What she saw made her heart race. Nestled between her dark hair and the nape of her neck was a second mouth. It was grotesque, malformed, and looked as though it had been stitched on with thread pulled from nightmares. Elvira stood frozen, her body trembling in shock. The mouth opened slightly, revealing jagged, glistening teeth, and a guttural growl escaped it, resonating eerily in the silence of the kitchen. "Feed me," it demanded in a sinister tone that echoed within her very soul. A wave of dread washed over Elvira, and nausea twisted in her stomach. Amid this horror, she felt something dark and malevolent awaken deep within her heart. Over the next few weeks, Elvira did everything in her power to ignore the mouth's terrifying demands. She would cover its hideous visage with a scarf, hoping that by hiding it, the dreadful affliction would somehow vanish. During the sunlight hours, she tried to maintain the normalcy of her life. She would deliver baked goods to her neighbors, hoping to lift their spirits as she had always done. But as night fell, the curse would rear its head, awakening a relentless hunger that grew louder and more demanding with every passing minute. At first, Elvira could manage to control her horror. She spent her days trying to keep the melancholy at bay, but as darkness enveloped the town, the monstrous maw would howl in torment, longing for food that felt closer to madness than sustenance. It was a wild craving, warped and twisted, drawing her thoughts away from the everyday world. Birds, cats, rats, and even the strange glow of the moon felt tantalizingly close, invading her mind like a tormented melody. The forest filled with her whispered screams of despair as she wrestled with demons no one else could see. The once cozy villagers soon noticed the change in Elvira. Her eyes, which had once sparkled like bright stars, now grew hollow and sunken. Her laughter, which had once filled the streets with warmth and joy, faded into whispers and murmurs of desperation. She roamed the nearby woods each evening, searching for something that she could bring back to the insatiable mouth that was now a part of her. Each time she returned empty-handed, she could feel the curse tightening its grip, reminding her that it would never be satiated. "I must be strong," she told herself each morning, fighting against the impending madness and the morbid desires threatening to consume her whole. Yet, with every passing day, the more she resisted, the more aggressive the cravings grew. Every ounce of her kindness was slowly replaced by an eerie malevolence, transforming her heart into something dark and twisted. The villagers began to notice alarming changes. Food was disappearing from their pantries, pets began to vanish without a trace, and an air of unease settled over the town like a sinister fog. Rumors of a monster in their midst began to spread like wildfire, igniting dread in the hearts of the townsfolk, who had once embraced Elvira as one of their own. Little did they know, the true monstrosity lurked behind Elvira's pretty facade, hidden beneath layers of flesh and guilt. One fateful evening, desperation reached its peak. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor as Elvira ventured out once more, driven deeper into the darkness by the insistent growling at her neck. This time felt different. She could feel the air around her humming with an ominous energy, as if other creatures were observing her, hidden away in the darkened corners of the forest. With trembling hands, she gathered whatever creatures she could find. Slugs squirmed in the damp soil, moths fluttered aimlessly in faded circles, and as she crept deeper into the woods, she stumbled upon the rotten flesh of an unidentifiable animal lying still in a clearing. Each offering she brought seemed only to stoke the mouth's hunger more and more. More, more, it shrieked angrily, its voice echoing sharply in the stillness of the night like a blasphemous chant that sent chills racing along her spine. The more she struggled to please it, the less her mind could maintain clarity. "Please, spare me," she whimpered into the wilderness, tears flowing freely down her face, cascading like tiny streams over her cheeks. Tremors shook her body as the grotesque mouth's abhorrence consumed every thought, twisting her mind into a maze of fear. As the village began to withdraw, whispering amongst themselves in frightened tones, Elvira was left feeling the heavy weight of isolation pressing down on her. Each day, as she tried to lift her spirits, she felt the creeping grip of despair tightening around her heart. With every refusal to feed the monstrous mouth that awaited her, another piece of her humanity faded away into the darkness. It was as if every meal she failed to provide was like a stone tied to her heart, dragging her further into a deep abyss. Little did Elvira know, as her hunger intensified, her appearance began to change. The pallor of her skin became sickly, her cheeks, once plump from good health, now felt hollow. Dark circles framed her once bright eyes like storm clouds, claiming her vibrant spirit. Her limbs grew frail, as if life itself was being drained away, leaving her feeling like a ghost wandering through a world filled with shadows. The whispers that once surrounded her turned to shouts and accusations, and the villagers finally realized she was no longer the woman they had loved. Now, she was a harbinger of terror, lurking in the shadows as the haunted tales they told began to morph into an uncanny reality. Each night, when darkness swirled around the town, many would bar their doors and windows, hoping to keep whatever curse had befallen Elvira at bay. It became a nightly ritual, the sound of cautious footsteps retreating, murmurs of fear spilling into the chilly air, and furtive glances exchanged in the corners of dim taverns. Children huddled close to their parents, whispering tales of the monster that now haunted the town under the guise of a woman, and stories of what Elvira used to be echoed through their minds like a distant memory. And so the nights turned into weeks, and the weeks melted into months, each one marked by the haunting image of Elvira, the woman who had given so much and yet, somehow, had become so feared. She wandered into the woods, the insatiable mouth demanding monstrous offerings as her sanity began to slip away, one fragment at a time. The forest grew familiar, wrapping her in a shroud of damp decay and shadows, each step digging her deeper into the depths of despair. As she searched for some desperate measure to quell the gnawing pain at her neck, her thoughts turned darker still. She began to think of ways to satisfy the craving, but instead of searching out innocent creatures, she considered the townspeople. The idea twisted around in her mind, much like a coiling vine, more tempting than any whisper of morality. What if, she pondered in the depths of her madness, I could silence it once and for all? But as the thought lodged itself deeper, she felt a flicker of resistance. No matter how dark the hunger inside her grew, a small part of her, the part that remembered laughter, warmth, and love, fought against the terrible notion. Each evening, she would peer cautiously from the edge of the woods, staring at her home, longing for the days of kindness and friendship. The laughter had turned to silence, and the warmth had been swallowed whole by the encroaching chill of isolation and despair. What was once a small, fog-laden town had now become a prison of her own making. Elvira realized that the darkness enveloping her was not just outside, but deep within, creeping into every corner of her mind and spirit. It was a battle against the grotesque demands of a second mouth and a long-lost sense of self. As the full moon rose in the sky, casting its silvery light on the ground, Elvira stood at a crossroad, between the woman she had been and the monster she was becoming. The answer remained hidden in the shadows, beyond the veil of terror, but if she wanted to reclaim her life, she needed to confront the hunger lurking within and find a way to break the curse before it consumed not just her, but the town she had once cherished. Though darkness whispered sweet nothings in her ear, urging her to give in, something deep within Elvira urged her to fight back. She could hear the villagers sometimes, their voices mingling with the rustle of leaves. Perhaps if she could find a way, perhaps there was still hope for redemption. She would have to be brave, for the fate of not just her soul, but the very fabric of the town rested precariously in her trembling hands. In the stillness of the night, she vowed to face her demons and claw her way back to the light, no matter how dark the path ahead might be. As days turned to weeks, the town began to crumble under Elvira's curse. Once, Elvira was known for her sharp mind and kind heart. She was a beloved figure, often seen helping her neighbors with small tasks or sharing warm stories, especially with the children who adored her. But now, her bright spirit had begun to decay, much like the flowers in the garden outside her home that had once bloomed brightly. Shadows danced in her mind, turning her fragmented thoughts into a chaotic mess. The mouth, a ghastly, insatiable maw that had latched onto her neck, consumed her every waking moment, robbing her of what joy she had left. Each day, Elvira could feel herself slipping further away from reality. It was as if she was drowning, trying to fight against the weight of an agony so overwhelming that it rang out in her ears like a horrible symphony of despair. The constant ache inside her was a reminder of the monster that lived within her, a beast urging her to seek something, anything, to fill the void it created. Elvira often clutched at her throat, feeling the cursed mouth move against her skin, its demands relentless and cruel. Desperation soon became her most loyal companion. It shadowed her, following her like a dark cloud whenever she wandered into the cursed woods that surrounded the town. Those woods used to be a place of solace, a delightful escape where birds would sing sweet songs and the sun streamed through the trees. But now, they were no longer innocent. They whispered dark secrets and beckoned her towards sinister thoughts. Each time she ventured out to hunt, the voice of the mouth grew stronger, more insistent, almost palpable in the air around her. It would echo in her mind like a cruel taunt, growing angrier with each return to her empty hands after a failed attempt to fulfill its deadly desire. "Why not take something more substantial?" it hissed, the voice leaking with malevolence. "Why not hunt the living? They are right there, so close." The idea sent icy chills racing down her spine, yet it lingered in the back of her mind like a vibrant, tempting fruit. She couldn't shake it off. The thought twisted itself around her thoughts, creating a tangled web from which she believed she could never escape. Before long, the townsfolk began to notice the gloom that hung heavy in the air like a thick fog. The innocent laughter of children that once echoed through the streets turned to nervous silence. The vibrant market stalls, once bustling with life and chatter, now stood quiet like ghostly sentinels. Rumors swirled through the village like a dark wind, each tidbit more frightening than the last. Children began to slip away, vanishing without a trace, and fear settled deep within the hearts of parents, tightening like a vice. No longer was Elvira seen as the kind woman who shared stories and baked sweet treats. She had become a figure cloaked in dread, the embodiment of nightmares and whispered tales of horror. As nights grew darker and longer, Elvira's descent into madness deepened. The townsfolk gathered together, sharing terrified glances over meals that tasted of salt and sorrow. They spoke in hushed tones of Elvira, wondering where it all went wrong, recalling the laughter she once shared, and the shadows that now hinted at danger. She had transformed from a cherished neighbor into a forsaken specter, prowling the night for something she couldn't name, a final, desperate solution to the gnawing hunger that clawed at her insides. On a particularly chilling night, when ragged clouds cloaked the moon and the wind howled like a ghost in agony, Elvira felt a powerful, unyielding urge to silence the unholy mouth once and for all. Shadows engulfed her as she stepped out, the air thick with foreboding. She found herself drawn toward the home of a child named Samuel, a sweet boy who had always looked up to her, admiring her kindness from afar. The thought of him, so full of innocent admiration, tugged at her heart, a fragile thread that barely held on amid the chaos. Creeping toward his window, Elvira spotted the soft glow of a lantern inside, casting warm light against the darkness. A chilling recognition washed over her, reminiscent of sweeter days. But that moment was quickly swallowed by the ravenous craving burning within. Peering inside, she watched as Samuel played with his wooden toys, giggling and laughing, the innocence radiating from him like fragrant blossoms amidst decay. The joy in his laughter twisted painfully inside her, igniting a part of her that still remembered joy of days before this curse. A part that screamed to run away and never return. But the growing rage from the cursed mouth roared louder, drowning out any semblance of humanity she had left. He must be fed, it snarled. its voice now a cacophony of madness echoing violently in her skull like a drum pounding a dreadful rhythm. This unholy command propelled her forward, each jagged step a battle of its own, until she stood before the door of Samuel's house, the wooden frame creaking ominously as she inhaled the sweet scent of life wafting through the crack. In that horrid moment, Elvira raised her trembling hand, poised to knock. 1,000 memories flickered through her mind, the warmth of laughter, the smell of freshly baked cookies wafting through the air, the vibrant life that had once filled her days. Those moments lit up her heart like stars in the night sky. But they were quickly swallowed by the ravenous maw that demanded sacrifices be made. Just as her shaking hand reached the wood, the door creaked open, and Samuel appeared before her, his large, innocent eyes wide with surprise. "Miss Elvira," he exclaimed, delight lighting up his face. "What are you doing here so late?" His sweet, naive voice cut through the murky darkness of Elvira's heart, a knife twisting deeper with each passing second. She could barely bear it. Still, the infernal voice inside her commanded her to act, relentless and ruthless. With a smile that felt more like a grimace, she stepped inside, allowing the darkness to envelop her like a shroud that wanted to drown her. "Oh, dear child," she replied, her voice both hollow and soft, as if the weight of the world pressed down on her. "I've come to share something magical with you." A part of her silently pleaded that he would be spared from recognizing the monster she had become. But unbeknownst to Samuel, as he turned to grab his cherished toys from the table, the insatiable hunger erupted. The mouth behind her twisted and writhed, desperate for the fresh warmth of flesh. When he turned to face her, oblivion behind Elvira's eyes threatened to spill forth like a dark storm, but the shadows distorted her, blocking the light of the person she once was. In that instant, time stretched and twisted. Samuel's bright expression twisted into shock as he caught a glimpse of something monstrous looming behind Elvira's eyes, an echo of the woman he once admired, now lost within shadows of hunger and despair. His small frame trembled slightly, realizing that the kind woman he had known had been replaced by a terrifying apparition of despair. Elvira lunged forward, and everything happened so quickly. A flash of understanding dawned in Samuel's eyes. But it all happened in one fleeting moment, too late. The mouth opened wide, a jagged maw formed of desperation and despair, swallowing the warmth of life that radiated from the child before her. Dark limbs clawed at an innocent heart as time seemed to stretch painfully long. The walls of the room echoed with horrible cries that burst forth from Samuel, the sound mingling with the grotesque laughter that erupted from the mouth that now drank deep of innocence lost to the unholy labyrinth of Elvira's madness. The reality of her actions crashed over Elvira like a towering wave. It pulled her under, drowning her in despair, but this moment of clarity was fleeting. The mouth behind her raged in triumph, devouring Samuel's warmth while the remnants of her shattered conscience wept silently. For the very first time, she grasped the true cost of the curse, the lives she had taken, innocent lives, and the chilling finality of the descent that had brought her to this desolate place. Yet, in the suffocating grasp of the monster, any sliver of guilt was crushed, submerged beneath the unquenchable desire for more. With horror flooding her veins and terror curling in her gut, Elvira fled into the night, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her chest. She left behind a forsaken house, now forever stained with the sins of her madness, and the echoes of a child's laughter turned to screams. The darkness welcomed her, wrapping around her like a thick fog, sheltering her from the painful reality she had created. But even in the shadows, the cries of Samuel haunted her, a chilling reminder of the depth of her fall. As Elvira stumbled deeper into the woods, a new awareness settled heavily in her heart. Her choices shaped the darkness that now consumed her. The cursed mouth continued to whisper, urging her forward as she wandered deeper into the night, unknowingly sealing her fate as the town pulsed with fear and shadows danced in the corners of the world she had once nourished with kindness. The heavy feeling of sadness settled over the town like a dark cloud. The townsfolk could no longer whisper among themselves. Their whispers turned into loud shouts as fear took over. Everyone realized something terrible was happening in their lives. They began to come together, gathering in the square, their faces filled with worry. Armed with torches that flickered in the dark and makeshift weapons made from sticks and iron tools, they prepared to confront the danger that lurked in the shadows. Elvira, once a beloved member of their community, now transformed into a fearful monster. Mothers held their children close, wrapping their arms around them tightly, their eyes wide with fright. "Stay indoors," they whispered harshly, trying to keep the fear from shaking their voices. The fathers, fueled by worry for their families, began crafting crude traps in the yards and gardens, hoping to prevent Elvira from sneaking into their homes. Wood was hammered together, and pits were dug, thinking of ways to protect what they held dear. But even with all their preparations, a dark feeling lingered in the back of their minds, a whisper they could not shake. It was the low growl of the beast that Elvira had become, echoing in their hearts, a reminder of the danger that hovered beside them. In the midst of the looming dread, Elvira wandered deeper into the forest, her surroundings dark and twisting, tangled with branches that seemed to reach out and grab her. She was trapped in a cruel circle of desire and regret, unable to find peace. The cool breeze swept over her skin, yet she felt nothing except the all-consuming fire of hunger that burned inside her. As the nights grew longer, she became entwined with the dark presence that wrapped itself around her mind and body like a shroud. The shadows appeared to dance around her like quiet ghosts, reminding her of the innocence she had lost. Soft memories of laughter, of warmth, of family, faded away into nothingness, just like wisps of smoke disappearing in the air, taken away by the growing darkness that had taken root deep within her heart. Her transformation, from a joyful woman to a haunted creature, became the talk of the village. It was no longer just an unfortunate tale, but rather a grim warning whispered among the children. "Have you heard?" they'd say to each other, eyes wide with fear. Elvira, the hungry woman? She had become more than just a name. Her story evolved into a shadow that haunted every child's dreams and sent shivers down the spines of those who remembered her as she once was. But even as the echoes of despair clung to her, Elvira discovered a strange kind of solace in the darkness. As night fell, the judgmental gazes of the villagers that pierced her soul faded away. Every evening turned into a tapestry woven with threads of torment, where the moon hung high in the sky, shining down upon her twisted reflection caught in the broken shards of mirrored glades. She could see the skin that had once been soft and kind now became tainted and rough, yet in the dim light of the moon, she found a perverse kind of beauty in her monstrous appearance. With a terrible craving clawing at her insides, she began to hunt at night, consuming whatever she found. A cloaked figure brushing past her in the dark, a rabbit that scurried past her hiding place, or the heart of an unsuspecting deer. Nothing ever seemed to satisfy her, leaving nothing but a hollowness that echoed within her. It was during one of these frenzied hunts that a terrible realization struck her hard. The taste of flesh was not just a means to fill her empty belly, but a disturbing dance entwined in her sorrow. Each victim she claimed only served to entwine her soul further with that of the beast, chaining her to the darkness that surrounded her. With each night that passed, she roamed through the thick forest like a wraith, moving rhythmically between life and death, her own heart beating in sync with the frantic pulse of her prey. She would linger near the edges of the village, peering through darkened windows, where she could still feel the warmth of family life. Each heartbeat she heard felt like an alluring siren's call, drawing her deeper into desperation. And as night fully enveloped the land, she was pulled closer, urging her to come closer, to partake in the joy of togetherness she once shared. But every time she took a step forward, she would pull back, her hunger constantly battling against the fading flickers of her lost humanity. One particularly bleak night, she found herself standing at the very edge of the village, where frightened eyes met frightened whispers. Parents barricaded their homes, and children huddled beneath thick blankets, trembling as they clung to what little innocence remained. The townspeople gathered in the square, their voices a complex mixture of fear and determination. They murmured about plans and ideas to rid their lives of the creature that tormented their every dream. In that moment, a dark and sinister hunger welled up within Elvira, as loud and demanding as thunder. They were gathered so close, pulsating with life, flesh and warmth, bursting with life that she desperately craved. But as she lingered close by, a cold heaviness began to weigh down her spirit, dragging her into an abyss where all hope vanished. The fear of the townsfolk twisted their thoughts. Elvira was no longer seen as a person they once cherished but as a nightmare made real. Every face that stared down into the glow of flickering flames held a piece of her old life, now tainted by the very horror she had become. Their words, filled with plans for revenge and protection, only deepened her sense of despair and hopelessness. The louder they spoke, the more Elvira yearned for the fading memories of the woman she had been, loved, hopeful, and free. And so, while the villagers made their preparations, hammering nails, tying ropes, and sharpening sticks, Elvira turned her back to everything and fled back to the woods, a wild place that offered her some twisted comfort. For now, she would retreat from their fury. She could sense that they would soon hunt her down, and with a heavy heart, she understood that there was no escaping what she had become. The truth of her transformation danced painfully in the corners of her mind, mocking her with every step. The kindness she once held so dear had been consumed, leaving behind the darkness that now ruled her every movement. Elvira wandered deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around her like guards around a prisoner. She was alone in this dark and silent world, where only the whispers of the leaves made sound. Each rustle in the bushes sent a shiver down her spine, and she could feel the shadows wrapping tighter around her. It was as if the very woods were alive, breathing in sync with her despair and the longing gnawing at her, leaving her feeling empty inside, a hollow shell of who she might have been. As she sauntered through the darkened woods, her heart filled with longing for a time when laughter echoed through her days and warmth filled her soul. She knew she had lost something precious, yet the further she wandered, the deeper the dark roots of her curse sank into her spirit. The moonlight barely pierced through the thick canopies overhead, and the darkness cradled her like a long-lost embrace. Each step further from the village felt both frightening and freeing, the woods becoming a new home where she could hide from judgment. However, she was still haunted by the sounds of the fleeing townsfolk, their frightened voices mingling with her own cries of despair, reminding her that she had once been a part of them, cherished and loved. Now, she was the monster that lingered in the shadows, forever drawn to her need for flesh, warmth, and companionship. Though darkness enveloped her, there was a flicker of hope tethered to her heart, a small ember that refused to be extinguished, begging her to find a way back, a way to reclaim the light that had once filled her soul. But with every hunt, every victim claimed, that hope grew weaker, buried beneath the weight of her regret. The familiar ache surged within her, the cravings, the loss, the wretched dance with despair. Still, the canvas of night was a perfect backdrop for a battle within. And just as the townsfolk lit their torches and prepared for the coming confrontation, Elvira stood in the shadows, torn between the beast she had become and the woman she wished she could still be. With every heartbeat echoing through the dark, she was pulled into a terrible choice: to embrace the darkness that had consumed her completely or to fight to reclaim the flickering light that could guide her back to humanity. With every passing moment, both worlds beckoned her to choose, spinning her story into an unpredictable fate that would not only decide her destiny but that of the town waiting just beyond the woods. The once peaceful town, where laughter and joy used to fill the air, was now steeped in blood-curdling dread. The cheerful gardens once bursting with vibrant blooms had turned to barren patches, and the happy chatter of children playing had faded into whispers of fear. The villagers, fueled by darkness, fear, and simmering anger, began to set traps and barricades. Their hearts raced as they worked together, desperate to rid themselves of Elvira's haunting presence. They diligently fashioned sharp wooden stakes, preparing to ward off the horrors that had invaded their lives. Armed with flickering torches that cast eerie shadows upon the ground and pitchforks that glinted in the moonlight, they roamed the night, determined to end her reign of terror. With every corner turned, they shouted her name into the dark, their voices trembling with a combination of bravery and dread. Yet, what they didn't know, hidden from their understanding, was that the more they hunted her, the deeper she sank into the abyss of her own madness. A madness that echoed their own fears. Elvira, twisted and darkened by her fate, now prowled the outskirts of the woods like a dreadful specter of hunger and despair. Night after night, she listened to the townsfolk's plans, the whispered prayers for deliverance that drifted into the lonely woods. They were cries for salvation, oblivious to the greater truth that twisted within her. The taste of fear danced on the air, intoxicating her senses, weaving itself into her insatiable craving. Deep inside her, in the shadows of her mind, the cursed mouth at the back of her head roared for sustenance. It wanted more than mere flesh. It thirsted for companionship, something to fill the dark abyss that had become her very soul. As the night grew deeper and the moon hung high in the velvet sky, Elvira's heart grew heavy. It was a strange mix of hunger and clarity that clouded her thoughts. She ventured closer to the village, the flickering glow of lanterns drawing her in like moths to a flame. Wide-eyed, her breath came out in ragged gasps. The insatiable mouth shrieked into her mind, "Eat! Devour!" A wild urgency surged within her, yet she hesitated, The shadows that danced on the faces illuminated by the flickering flames of the town suddenly seemed different. For the briefest moment, she caught a glimpse of her neighbors, their faces stricken with hopelessness. She remembered the laughter of children, the warmth of shared stories, and the gentle smiles of friends. Their fears twisted her heart, weaving together with her own despair like a dark tapestry, intricately crafted from the threads of sadness and longing. Fueled by a fresh surge of madness, Elvira knew she had to make a choice as she approached the homes nestled together like a cluster of sleeping birds. Tension surged through her body, coursing through her veins, interfacing desperation with moments of clarity and guilt. These feelings tugged at her heartstrings as if they were thin threads ready to snap. With trembling hands, she gravitated towards a window, her heart a wild drum in her chest. As her fingers brushed against the window frame, she paused, entranced by the sweet smells wafting from within. A treasure trove of baked goods nestled on the countertop. Golden brown breads, fluffy cakes, and buttery pastries that called to her with a voice so sweet, it almost felt like a whisper of life and warmth surrounding her. The unholy mouth roared in protest, gnashing at her thoughts and drowning out the remnants of her humanity buried deep inside her. "Feed me," it wailed. Yet still, she hesitated, caught between the ferocious grip of insatiable hunger and the flickering light of the humanity that still shimmered within her like a forgotten dream. It was then, at the tipping point of her choice, that one family's door creaked open and a child stepped outside. It seemed like a scene frozen in time. The child's tear-streaked face reflected a hollow fear that embraced the surrounding darkness. The fragile innocence of this little one tugged at something deep within Elvira. In that moment, everything shifted, and what happened next became a blur of emotions that would forever change the landscape of their lives. Elvira's hunger clawed at her insides like an insatiable beast awakened from slumber. The child, eyes wide with confusion and terror, took a step back, stumbling slightly on the uneven ground, yet the call of hunger was an intoxicating spell that seemed too strong to resist. Shadows swallowed the night, wrapping around them like a dark shroud, as the curse consumed both Elvira and the child. Suddenly, the townsfolk were jolted awake by the sound of anguished cries piercing through the silence of the night, a haunting sound that would forever echo in their minds. The acrid scent of fear permeated through their homes, a sickly sweet smell that clung to every corner and crevice. One by one, the villagers stumbled outside, their faces pale and drawn, filled with dread as they found the unthinkable, a haunting vision that would coil around their hearts, spiraling into a world devoid of hope. What they found was a scene too horrific to comprehend. The darkness seized Elvira with its cold, relentless grip, and in a tangle of claws and teeth, the last remnants of her story faded under the wretched glow of remorse. The villagers could only stand in shock as the truth of their creation surged, realizing that the monster they had sought was forever lost within the cold embrace of the dark forest. A relentless terror lingering like a wound without a bandage, a curse that would follow them throughout the ages. As the first light of dawn peeked over the horizon, the town fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional whisper amongst the townsfolk. Life in their village shifted dramatically in the wake of that horrifying night. The story of Elvira and the terrible events unfolded like a chilling fable passed from one villager to another, whispers transformed into lullabies sung to restless children who struggled to sleep, tormented by the shadow of Elvira's tale. The faces of their parents, once filled with joy, now wore tight expressions of caution. As the years turned into decades, the children grew, yet they recounted her story with urgency, perpetuating the cautionary parable of the hungry woman. The soul forever lost, condemned to a tragic existence where hope failed to thrive. The darkness surrounding her continued to loom like a thick fog, a constant presence that haunted even the brightest days. It served as a reminder that sometimes, monsters linger not in the depths of nightmares but within the heart of a loved one warped by despair. And so, the town wore the shadows of tragedy like an old cloak, heavy and foreboding, a chilling testament that sometimes, monsters don't hide beneath beds or in dark corners. Sometimes, they wear the faces of those we once loved, twisted forever by circumstances beyond their control. The curse of the hungry woman would haunt the hearts of generations, a stunning reminder that the horrors lurking just beyond the light could devour even the most innocent of souls, leaving behind a trail of sorrow and loss. Silent nights returned to the town, but they brimmed with a tension that could not be ignored. The villagers began to speak in hushed tones about Elvira, her story evolving into folklore that twisted and swirled with each retelling. They spoke of the darkness that enveloped her, how something inside her turned off the light, the very light that brought joy to their lives, now replaced by shadows. The once colorful children's storybooks were abandoned in favor of tales of caution, warnings about the hungry woman that festered in the woods, a lesson on what could happen when feeling lost turns one into a monster. And as the years passed, although her name would fade from their consciousness, the essence of fear remained ever present. The memory of that dark night served as a warning sign, a chilling reminder that despair could distort love, twisting souls into grotesque shadows of who they once were. The villagers knew, deep down, that to let fear win was to invite darkness into their very own hearts. They took the tales of Elvira to heart, knowing that sometimes it is our own fears, insecurities, and isolation that can turn us into the monsters we dread. In the end, the town stood as a testament to the powerful emotions that simmer within us all: light, hope, darkness, and despair intertwined, each fighting for control. The legend of the hungry woman would linger long after the last candle burned out, a shadow cast over their town, always there, always whispering, reminding them what they could become if they ever let despair take root. As time continued, the townsfolk learned to hold on to one another, a fragile bond woven from stories shared, laughter exchanged, and love rekindled, ensuring that the shadows would never again be allowed to rule their hearts. In this way, they transformed their fear into kindness and understanding, forever remembering Elvira, the woman who lost herself to darkness and the one whose story would forever glow like embers in the night, inviting them to always choose light over shadow, hope over despair,